Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Analysis. I'm your host Irfan Ali. The United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs reports that heavy rains have now affected around 55,000 families across Gaza. This comes as dozens of Palestinians have died in recent days. With severe weather worsening an already dire humanitarian situation, last week saw torrential rain sweep across the Gaza Strip, flooding hundreds of tents, sheltering families and displaced by 2 years of war. Local health officials say that harsh conditions led to the death of a baby girl from exposure. We have this report. A warning, this video contains graphic content.
Torrential rain swept across the Gaza Strip on Thursday, inundating hundreds of tents, sheltering families displaced by 2 years of war. The flooding led to the death of 8-month-old Rahaf Abu Jazar. Medics say the baby girl died of exposure to cold after water poured into her family's tent in Khan Yunis. Her mother, Hayar, wept as she held Rahaf's body.
There was nothing wrong with her. I fed her at night. I fed her, but I don't know. Suddenly I woke up, I found her cold and dead. There was nothing wrong with her. Oh, my heart, I swear to God, I fed her during the night. There was nothing wrong with her. Oh, the fire in my heart, the fire in my heart. Oh, my life.
Gaza's Civil Defense Service said most of the tent encampments across the enclave were flooded, and it received more than 2,500 calls for help. While a ceasefire has broadly held since October, the war destroyed much of Gaza's infrastructure. Municipal and civil defense officials say they couldn't cope with the storm because of fuel shortages and damage to equipment. They say Israel destroyed hundreds of vehicles used to pump water during the war. After the storm, some tried to clear out water and mud with shovels. Mohammed Abd El-Al said her shelter collapsed. She asks how her children, one with asthma and one who gets seizures, would be able to sleep. A UN report before the storm said 761 displacement sites hosting about 850,000 people were at high risk of flooding, and thousands of people had moved in anticipation of the heavy rain. UN and Palestinian officials say at least 300,000 new tents are urgently needed for the roughly 1.5 million people still displaced. Gazans have resorted to ripping out iron rods from the debris of bombed houses and using them to prop up tents or to sell for a few dollars.
As buildings continue to collapse, tents are flooding and critical infrastructure remains severely damaged under ongoing Israeli restrictions. Gaza hospitals have reported 1 new fatality and 13 injuries in the past 24 hours as Israel's assault on the enclave continues. Now, child malnutrition also remains shockingly high as evidence that points to little aid reaching Gaza even after the October ceasefire. We have this report.
A shockingly high number of children in Gaza are still suffering from acute malnutrition. The UN's Children's Agency has said, adding that nowhere near enough aid is making it into the enclave. And that's despite an October ceasefire that was meant to enable a major increase in humanitarian aid. UNICEF spokesperson Tess Ingram, speaking by video link from Gaza, said malnutrition numbers had dropped, but they remained 5 times higher than during a previous ceasefire in February.
So the 9,300 children admitted in October is down from a peak in August and then again from September, but it's still a shockingly high number. In terms of how many of those children were acutely malnourished, all of them. This is all for children with acute malnutrition.
The UN has long complained of obstacles to delivering and distributing aid in Gaza, blaming impediments on Israel and lawlessness. Israel has criticized the UN-led operation and accuses Hamas of stealing aid, which the militants denied. UNICEF is able to import considerably more aid into the enclave than it was before the October 10th agreement. But obstacles remain, Ingram said.
That's positive, but of course we're coming off an incredibly low base.
In August, during the war, a UN-backed hunger monitor determined that famine conditions were affecting about 500,000 people, or a quarter of Gaza's population. Children were severely affected by hunger as the war progressed, and experts have warned the effects could cause them lasting harm.
Rescue teams say several victims are still trapped, either buried beneath rubble or stranded on damaged roads, while ambulances and civil defense crews remain unable to reach many areas. Since the ceasefire on the 11th of October 2025, health authorities report that 395 people have been killed, 1,088 wounded, and 634 bodies recovered from the rubble. In a separate development, tensions escalated today in occupied East Jerusalem. Eyewitnesses say hundreds of Jewish settlers entered the courtyard of Al-Aqsa Mosque under the protection of Israeli police, moving through the compound and performing Talmudic rituals. With tensions still high, what's next for the Gaza ceasefire, and will the truce last? We have this report.
More than 2 months after Israel and Hamas agreed to a ceasefire, pausing 2 years of devastating warfare in Gaza, most of the fighting has stopped. However, tensions remain as both sides accuse each other of breaching the agreement, and the most difficult steps of the peace process still need to be addressed. So what was initially agreed? The ceasefire steps are outlined in 3 documents. The most detailed is a 20-point plan issued by US President Donald Trump in September. It ultimately calls for Hamas to disarm and have no governing role in Gaza, and for Israel to withdraw from the enclave. However, not all points have been fully agreed upon. On October 9, Israel and Hamas signed a more limited ceasefire deal. This included a hostage and prisoner release, a halt to warfare, partial Israeli withdrawal, and increased aid. The United Nations Security Council endorsed the Trump plan, authorizing a transitional governing body and international stabilization force in Gaza. Since the ceasefire, all 20 remaining living hostages have been returned, along with hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. However, disputes over aid persist. Hamas claims fewer aid trucks are entering Gaza than agreed. Aid agencies report a shortage of necessary supplies, but Israel denies blocking aid and states it is fulfilling its obligations under the truce. The Rafah border crossing into Egypt remains closed, pending the return of the last hostage's body. Meanwhile, Gaza is still in ruins, and residents face a humanitarian crisis. The UN's Children's Agency reports high levels of child malnutrition, compounded by flooding and a lack of sanitation. And some violence has continued. Palestinian militants have killed at least 3 Israeli soldiers in Gaza, while Israeli fire and operations targeting Hamas have killed around 400 Palestinians, according to Gaza health officials. So which key issues remain unresolved? The Trump plan envisions a transitional government overseen by an international board of peace, chaired by Trump, with announcements expected in 2026. However, Hamas insists it will only disarm once a Palestinian state is established. Well, the ceasefire's future is uncertain, and Israel has indicated it may resume military action if Hamas does not disarm peacefully. Many suspect the Trump plan may never be fully realized, and the frozen conflict could continue indefinitely. Despite international recognition for a Palestinian state, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has ruled out a Palestinian statehood. Upcoming Israeli elections in 2026 offer little hope for change in his stance.
I would like to welcome our guest, Professor Kamal Hawash, and Palestinian academic and political analyst, and Osama Nazal, Palestinian affairs correspondent. Welcome, gentlemen. Assalamu alaikum. Osama, I'll start with you first. If you can kindly give our viewers a situational analysis of what's happening in the West Bank. We saw in Al-Aqsa, we've seen people come into Al-Aqsa desecrating the third holiest site in Islam. We've seen the settler violence continue to have uproar in the community. Can you give our viewers a complete overview of the situations thus far?
Yeah, the situation in all of the occupied Palestinian territories has not changed, as the Israeli occupation military escalation is still going on against almost all of the Palestinian towns and villages, mainly in the northern part of the occupied West Bank. In addition to that, the Israeli settlers' violence that is supported by the Israeli military establishment is escalating every day, as we all saw how the Israeli occupation army killed a Palestinian young man in the village of Itqu near Bethlehem 3 days ago, and one day after that, the Israeli settlers killed another boy of the same village. The Israeli military incursions into the Palestinian towns and the detention campaign never stopped. The Israeli military checkpoints on the roads, dissecting the Palestinian citizens from one another and restricting the freedom of movement for the Palestinian citizens are increasing, as we have more than 1,000 Israeli military checkpoints and gates suffocating the Palestinians in the West Bank. And of course, we know what Israeli plans for Jerusalem. Jerusalem is completely separated from the Palestinian sphere, and Israeli settlers desecrating holy sites every day.
Professor Hawash, at the end of that report, we saw the kind of situational analysis of what's next. I mean, we've seen a few months of the truce come into force. We've seen now coming into Christmas for the Christian Palestinians, now celebrating Christmas after abandoning it last year in solidarity with the Palestinian people of Gaza and the West Bank and beyond. What's your thoughts on this truce or so-called ceasefire truce holding on?
I mean, first of all, I wanted to mention, because it never gets mentioned, that the Palestinians in Gaza have no electricity. So on top of everything else, they just do not have any electricity to turn lights on, to have heat. There's nothing. Can you imagine living without electricity for 2 years? I think we would, all three of us would struggle to be without electricity for a few hours. So never mind that. Add to that the pictures that you're showing, that they're living in these terrible conditions, and Israel is to blame. The UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, has said that there are in Jordan enough proper tents and temporary houses for 1 million people. But Israel will not allow that in. Now, that's the background to when you ask me what's going to happen next. It is difficult to see how the situation would improve for Palestinians from the situation that they are facing now. And the reason for that is there are 4 countries that are oversee the implementation of the Trump supposed peace plan, which is neither peace nor a plan. Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey, and then the United States. Israel doesn't listen to Qatar, Egypt, or Turkey, and it only listens to the United States. Trump is either living in denial or he doesn't really know what's going on, but he doesn't think Israel has breached the ceasefire, even though there have been more than 300 breaches of the ceasefire. So when I come to try and answer that question, I've been asked it a lot recently. People want to know what I think about what's going to happen. I just say to them, more of the same. I don't see that the border crossings will be opened for the Palestinians to completely have access to the aid that they need. I do not see Israel withdrawing. I do not see um, particularly those who need medical help, getting that medical help. The Palestinians are trying to pursue some sort of education, particularly in schooling, and they're struggling. But I have to say that in the results of the recent school leaving certificate, the Tawjihi, Gaza students did brilliantly despite all the problems that they face. So I'm afraid, in short, at the moment, I do not see a change unless Trump says to Israel, you must allow us to start not rebuilding, but building, because at the back of this, what Trump and his son-in-law Kushner want is they want that seafront so that they can establish the Riviera of the Mediterranean. And he can only do that when things are stable, when they can bring in equipment and build. And then Kushner would be there selling properties to his friends and his associates. So the three Arab countries cannot influence Israel. People think they can, they cannot, because ultimately it is only America, and really it is only Trump who can, and therefore I'm afraid I am not optimistic about the next few months.
Professor Hawash, I was just staying with you. You've been heavily involved in the last 2 years and a bit with the Palestinian movement, the demonstrations, national demonstrations, which has amassed over, if we aggregate everything together, over 1 million plus people, or even 2 million people over the last 2 years. We've seen yesterday the word the globalized intifada coming into effect, into disrepute, in the sense that if people are caught using or putting in on banners, then potentially they may be arrested by the Metropolitan Police or arrested in Manchester, and that's in the wake of the Bondi Beach horrific attacks that happened there. Now, what's your thoughts on this word being in effect being prescribed?
First of all, on the Bondi Beach atrocity, it's always interesting that they say you must separate what happens in Palestine and Gaza from what happens to Jews elsewhere. But then they bring it in, and Netanyahu did, by claiming that because Australia recognized the Palestinian state, that added to the anti-Semitism that led to this attack. Now, on the phrase itself, I was interviewed yesterday by a well-known radio station here in the UK about this topic just after it was announced. And I tried to take them back to understand what it means, i.e., the phrase globalize the intifada. And I explained to them the intifada was the Palestinian uprising against occupation and injustice. Globalizing the intifada is pursuing that in the countries that people live in to put pressure on Israel. So it has absolutely nothing to do with a will or a wish to attack Jews, which is what they have been trying to imply. The pro-Israel lobby doesn't want the use of that phrase. It doesn't want the use of from the river to the sea, etc., etc. And they want to see these demonstrations banned. By the way, I estimated that in the UK alone, the London protests have had 10 million people attend them, because there have been 30 or more. And I think that's an important figure, so people can understand the strength of feeling. And these people, I've been on most of these demonstrations. I never heard people use the following phrases, because that's being claimed at the moment. They say that people regularly shout, "Gas the Jews." I have never heard that said. They claim that kill the Jews. I never heard that said. And in these peaceful demonstrations, we have had a Jewish bloc for almost every one of them. And we have Holocaust survivors in these demonstrations. They neither feel fearful because they are Jews, nor do they feel that we must change our positions because of what's happened, because they blame Netanyahu for raising anti-Semitism around the world. And as I said to the interviewer yesterday, I'm prepared to bet that the people who carried out the atrocity in Australia, and it was an atrocity, were not motivated by globalize the intifada. There are all sorts of other reasons that might have contributed to that, which the police there is trying to investigate. But it all shows one thing. The pro-Israel lobby has been pressuring the previous government and this government to end any criticism of Israel. And they weaponize anti-Semitism to do that, because people think, obviously, there should be no racism against any group, including the Jewish citizens of Britain. And I wrote an article a few years ago, which I labeled, I would like to see anti-Semitism eradicated, but also sanctions on Israel. And you can do both. So I think if they believe that ending the use of this phrase is going to bring peace to the region, they are dreaming. What will bring peace to the region is a final acceptance by Zionism, which will not happen, that the only way to achieve peace is to make peace with the Palestinians. If it is to be one state, fine. If it's to be two states, fine. The point is that there is an injustice that has to be corrected. Otherwise, we would be here again. Maybe not in a year or 2 years in Gaza and other places, but the Palestinians will not give up their right to freedom, justice, and equality.
Osama, I would like to bring you in here. We've seen reports coming out that there may be a potential gas, natural resources deal with Egypt and Israel. Some Palestinians have said that this is the resources of the Palestinian people and who are Israel to give out these contracts to the likes of the Egyptian regime. Can you give our viewers any insight into that potential deal?
Really, it is painful and it hurts a lot that the Palestinian people are being slaughtered and butchered every day by the Israeli Zionist regime. And Gaza is being genocided. And as you mentioned in your report, Gaza is drowning because of the rainstorm. And the rainstorm is not the problem. The problem is the Israeli siege and the Israeli occupation that does not allow access of any equipment into Gaza in order to help the Palestinians overcome this humanitarian disaster that is caused by the Israeli occupation bombs and rockets. And in the end, you see how some Arab governments go and sign agreements with Israel with full disregard to the blood of the Palestinian children and to the suffering of the Palestinian people in general. Instead of driving out the Israeli ambassador from the Arab capitals that they have these ambassadors, we see that they are signing more agreements and they are strengthening these ties with the Zionist regime. So what I can say that it really hurts and it's painful and it shows how the Palestinian people are abandoned by the people who are very close to them, by their neighbors, by their brothers. While in Europe and other countries in the West, as our friend said, 10 million people in London took to the streets and protested the Israeli genocide against the Palestinians. So it is a very complex equation that is difficult to analyze.
Thank you very much for that, Osama. Professor Hawash, we are seeing that people are, in fact, not conflating the fact of anti-Semitism, Zionism, etc. We see that individuals like the chief rabbi have said that it's because of the hatred of the Israeli state or the dislike of what the genocide that they're committing there. We've seen the likes of the Community Trust Safety Forum, who are in charge of looking after security arrangements and informing the police around Jewish institutions, synagogues, etc., saying the same mantra. We've got the likes of the Board of Jewish Deputies saying that there's a conflation. Now, in your understanding of the history of Palestinians and the Palestinian people and the protesters, do you believe there is a conflation, and do you believe that this has been done intentionally because of the actions that have happened in Gaza over the last 2 years or so?
Well, I mean, first of all, there is racism in the UK. Let's be clear, whether it's against Muslims, against Jews. So anti-Semitism is real. Hatred of Muslims because they are Muslims is real. The far right is working as hard as it can to direct attention towards Muslims as people that do not share the values of the UK, that there are examples of crimes they commit and so on. Of course, every community has good and bad people, if you like. The chief rabbi is really someone who doesn't serve the Jewish community as he claims. because he is here to laud Israel. He is here, for example, he celebrates the march through Jerusalem every year. Why? You are supposed to be the rabbi for the British Jews, not for Israel. My understanding is he went and visited IDF. And I understand also that some of his relatives and friends are in the IDF who might have committed atrocities against Palestinians. That doesn't bring a shining light onto the role that he has. And the Board of Deputies, we know they don't represent all Jewish people. As I said, in these marches, about 1,000 people have form a Jewish bloc to show the absolute disgust with what Israel is doing. Because anyone with any humanity who sees the pictures, I mean, you know, the pictures that you were showing didn't include ones with the high wind, that people were literally living in the elements, under the elements. They weren't even in tents. And when they support a country that will not even allow shelter to go in to protect these civilians, these children, that results in the death of babies, the use of starvation as a weapon. I mean, how can you support that?
Well,
It isn't just that they mention their support for Israel, but they support what it does, and that brings, unfortunately, shame on Zionism. But that's what Zionism is. It's a racist ideology,
yeah.
and the quicker we are rid of that ideology, the better things will be, and the closer we will be to peace.
Obviously, Professor Hawash, the Chief Rabbi, is not here to defend himself on those points. But anyway, thank you very much for that. And thank you to our guest, Professor Kamal Hawash, and also to Osama Nazal from the West Bank. And this has been Analysis, and I have been Irfan Ali. And please do join us in the next few days. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.